What's up, guys? We're working on the 2JZ E36 again, prepping it for a drift event coming up in 8 days. I'm going to the North Dakota 10K shootout. It's definitely the biggest competition I've ever done, so I'm trying to make sure everything on the car is good and that I'm prepared. So we've got a few things to do. I already got all the wheels and tires mounted. We got some new fronts finally. I found and fixed a boost leak in my throttle body, the gasket there. So hopefully we don't have any more boost leaks. I also redid my power steering setup to fix a leak that it had. So that should be all good now. And next up on the list is something I really didn't want to do, but it's at the back of my mind all the time, and that is pulling the transmission and inspecting everything. At the last event, the clutch pedal was sticking for just a second every time I would clutch kick, which was really weird and threw me off. And then it's also been engaging the clutch quite a bit further from the floor than it used to, so I'm concerned there's something wrong with it. I want to pull it out and take a look at everything just to be sure. Who knows if we can even get parts between now and the event, but we're going to check it out and see what's wrong.
Much later.
Alright, I finally got the transmission out after a bunch of struggles. So originally I put the engine and transmission in the car all as one unit, just slid it in with the engine hoist. So I've never actually tried to take the engine or the transmission out while the engine was in. And I discovered that even though it is a E36 transmission, it's for the later models and they must be a little bit different. Plus my adapter plate setting it back a little further. All of the little ears around the bell housing where the bolts go through were hitting the transmission tunnel and not allowing it to slide back far enough to be able to drop it down. So it was a huge struggle. I ended up taking out both engine mounts. That way I could drop the engine down a little bit to give me some more room. And then I was finally able to just barely get it out of there. So now that we've got her out, I think I might have found the clutch issue, but it's really hard to say. So when I pulled it out, the throwout bearing and the pivot fork just fell out. And this little pivot pin that's for the one side of the fork and your slave cylinder pushes on this side, this pivot pin is supposed to be bolted to the transmission. It's got a bolt that goes through the outside and holds it right there on the inside. But that bolt must have just fallen out. So this could have been moving around and potentially causing the sticking problem. But of course, while the trans is out, I had to inspect my clutch, and it is looking like it's getting pretty low on the friction material, which would explain why it's engaging further up from the floor than it used to. It's just a lot thinner than it used to be. So I think I should probably go ahead and replace that before the big competition in a week. If I can get one in time, I'll put it in and all should be good. If I can't get one in time, I think this one will get me through the event, but I'd rather replace it if I can. So while we're waiting for a new clutch to show up, I've got a few other upgrades, some pretty important ones here. So over here you can see my axle graveyard. I've been through a lot of axles. If you guys have seen the videos, you'll know that. And almost every single one of them was just the CV joint exploding, the one that attaches to the diff. So you've got this side of the axle attaches to the diff, and this side goes through the hub and gets bolted onto the hub. Every single time it's been this CV joint, except I do have one axle here that just sheared off the end of the axle, but that's the only one that has done that. So there's a ton of options for axle upgrades, but almost all of them are really expensive. You can buy some drive shaft shop axles for over $1,000 just for a pair. Or what a lot of people recommend is swapping the whole rear end to M3 stuff because they have stronger axles, but then you need to get M3 trailing arms, M3 hubs and brakes, and the whole shebang there. And I believe the large case diff rather than the medium case that this car has with. So that's a ton of work, something I'd rather not have to do. So the option that I went with and that I had been leaning towards is just upgrading those CV joints with a much better, beefier CV joint. Now there's not a ton of information out there on what's better or what works, but I found that a Porsche CV joint is actually the same spline, the same bolt pattern, but it's thicker, it's beefier, it's got stronger internals, and should theoretically be stronger. So I've got a couple of those right here. I ordered these from FCP Euro, so they'll actually have a lifetime warranty, but here's the part number. I don't believe this is the part number I used to find them, so I will post a link to this part down in the description. So you can see the difference here. Not a huge difference as far as internals go, but the housing is much thicker on this one. The ball bearings do seem to be quite a bit bigger. Without taking them apart and measuring them, I'm not certain on that. But hopefully this should be quite a bit stronger. Not to mention this one is brand new, whereas this one has who knows how many miles on it because it came off a used car. The only issue that I know of off the top of my head with these is that the axle bolt holes are actually quite a bit smaller, so I will have to drill those out. Hopefully that won't be too difficult. I don't have a drill press, but we're gonna give it a shot. And then the other thing that I'm going to do to try to save axles that a lot of people recommend is a clutch delay valve. Now this probably looks much different than the clutch delay valves you would see if you were to search for one and get an aftermarket one for your car, because these BMWs actually came with one from the factory. Mine didn't because it's old enough that they didn't have it yet, but the later E36s did have one. And most drifters immediately take this out because it makes the clutch awful and very hard to drift with, but that's because it has a pretty small diameter. However, this part right here costs about $25 versus the $150 that you would spend on a aftermarket clutch delay valve. And all I'm going to do is drill this out to the same size orifice as what the aftermarket stuff does, so it'll be a bigger orifice, but still smaller than just a free line, so it'll give you just a little bit of delay, a little bit of shock absorption on the driveline, and should hopefully save me some axles, but we'll just have to wait and see. The nice thing about this clutch delay valve being factory is all I have to do is unscrew the clutch line right before it converts into rubber at the slave cylinder, stick this in between the two lines, screw it back together. It's as simple as that. So I'm going to get these axles pulled out of the car and rebuilt with the new CV joints, and then we'll get those thrown in and get the clutch delay valve put in. Alright, so I got the axles finished up and put back in the car. They're a pretty simple concept. Basically, your CV joint attaches to the end of the axle. This part goes towards the axle, which then goes on the CV joint, and then this part goes on the other side of the joint, and those hold all the grease in. So once you get this outer cap off, then you'll have a C-clip in here holding this onto the axle. Take that C-clip off, pull this off with the back housing, which you have to disconnect the boot from first. And then you have your joint off and you're ready to put the new one on. So I got the new ones drilled out to the right size. That wasn't an issue. However, the issue was I took the CV joints apart so that I didn't get a bunch of metal shavings down inside the ball bearings. And putting them back together was a struggle. They're not fun to try to put back together. You've got to have them lined up just right to get each ball bearing in, and then you've got to be able to pivot it. It was a pain, but we got her done, got them in the car. These joints are just a little bit thicker, which is actually a good thing. A lot of guys run axle spacers, especially when you lower the car. Basically, that changes the pivot angle of the axle and makes it pull further out of the CV joint because the CV joint can move in and out. So when it's pulled further out, it has a higher chance of breaking. So if you put an axle spacer in there between the diff and the axle, you'll keep the axle a little bit shorter so that it's stronger. So having the thicker CV joint essentially does the same thing. It just adds space so that the axle doesn't pull out of the splines quite as far. So I also got the new clutch, and after receiving it and looking at it and comparing the thickness of the friction material to the one that's in the car, They look like they're actually really close to the same, which means my clutch is not worn out. It's got plenty of life left in it. So I didn't want to risk putting the new one in and then not breaking it in and having something go wrong. So I decided to just leave the old clutch in. I've got the new one as a backup in case something does go wrong with the current one. But we got the transmission put back in, got the pivot fork bolted down, and everything's back in. So the car can be driven again. So I think next thing on the list is gonna be stitching my bumper back together. As you can see, it's in 2 pieces. So for now, we're just gonna use some zip ties, stitch it back together, and get it thrown back on the car. Good old drift stitch method, just drill some holes on each side of the bumper and run zip ties across it. So we'll see how well it works out. It's split right down the middle, so it may not look too great or be solid enough once we get it stitched together. But there's only one way to find out. Alright, so we got the first set of stitches done. Always make sure you've got the head of the zip tie on the inside where it's not visible. So now I'm going to try to stitch it back together in as many places as possible, through here and here, and probably one right here. So I'm going to get her all put back together and I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's all done.
1 hour later.
And she's all done. I'd say that was a pretty successful surgery. It all stays together in one piece. You can just pick it up, slap it on the car, take it off if you need to. So I'm really happy with that. I should be able to get it back on the car and at least have a bumper on there. I hate showing up to an event, especially a big one like the ND 10K shootout that I'm going to, with missing body panels. It's just a big pet peeve of mine. I try to make the car as complete as possible to try to be as professional as possible. So we'll get the bumper on, we'll have a complete car, and all will be good.
Several days later.
Alright, so I got busy trying to get the car ready and did not film an outro, but I got the clutch delay valve in. It turns out it's actually larger than what the aftermarket ones come with, so I didn't have to drill it out. I just put it in and called it good. And then I test drove it, and it feels really weird. The clutch pedal feels really soft. It could still have air in it, but it's working just fine. It just seems like there's a long delay when you let out the clutch, like between gear shifts and everything. I haven't tried clutch kicking it yet to see what that does. But we'll find out because we're at the track now. So this is going to be my first legitimate competition like this. So if you guys want to see it and see how I do, make sure to stay tuned for the next video.